Catherine O'Hara engineered a psychological landscape that redefined the architecture of modern comedy. This systemic dismantling of celebrity artifice transformed the yes and philosophy from a mere theatrical exercise into a diagnostic tool for the human condition. 50 years of creative output reveals a chameleon who utilized obscurity as a tactical advantage, eventually shattering global streaming records and reclaiming the throne of the comedic hegemony. Why did the most versatile performer of a generation choose to remain a mirage until the world finally caught up? How does a waitress from Etobicoke end up dictating the cultural GDP of a nation through the power of a single, unidentifiable accent? The genesis of the Catherine O'Hara phenomenon begins not in the neon glare of Los Angeles, but within the frostbitten industrial periphery of 1970s Toronto. To understand the fundamental trajectory of her career, one must look toward the suburb of Etobicoke and a specific localized anomaly at the Second City Theatre in 1974. At this precise moment, Gilda Radner, the reigning titan of the Toronto stage, vacated her position to join a nascent experimental project in New York called Saturday Night Live. O'Hara, then a mere understudy working the coat check at waitressing tables, was thrust into the vacuum. This was the 0 point. As detailed by Jeff Robbins in the definitive historical guide SCTV Behind the Scenes, this period represented a volatile intersection of Canadian national identity and American media hegemony. The Second City was not merely a comedy club, it was a cultural laboratory where artists navigated the media borderlands, a term used to describe the friction between domestic Canadian storytelling and the overwhelming gravitational pull of the US market. O'Hara entered this arena without formal training, relying instead on a primal improvisational instinct. She did not just fill Radner's shoes, she dismantled the prototype of the female comedian. While the industry often relegated women to the role of the straight woman or the supporting wife, O'Hara utilized the improvisational abundance mindset to out-eccentric her male counterparts, constructing personas so dense with internal logic they became impenetrable. By 1976, this localized energy crystallized into SCTV, Second City Television. The premise was a masterpiece of meta-commentary, a fictional low-budget broadcast station in the simulated town of Melonville. This setup allowed O'Hara to execute a forensic examination of television itself. Her characters were not mere parodies, they were critiques of the desperation inherent in the entertainment industry. When she performed Lola Heatherton, the boozy, washed-up lounge singer, she wasn't just mocking a trope, she was exposing the systemic rot of showbiz desperation. The textures of these early performances, the smell of cigarette smoke in the Toronto club, the flicker of low-resolution global television network broadcasts, formed the architecture of a comedic revolution that would eventually dominate the digital age. The most significant turning point in O'Hara's career was not a grand debut, but a silent exit. In 1981, as SCTV navigated a precarious transition between network deals, the juggernaut of Saturday Night Live faced a cataclysmic internal collapse following the departure of its original cast and creator. NBC, desperate to retool the franchise, targeted the SCTV family, poaching O'Hara to replace Ann Risley. On the surface, this appeared to be the ultimate payoff, a move from the minor leagues of Canadian syndication to the peak of the American media hegemony. However, the reality lay in the toxic flow of power behind the scenes at Rockefeller Center. Investigative reports and internal accounts from the period reveal a systemic anomaly. The atmosphere at SNL was one of visceral hostility. The catalyst for O'Hara's departure was an infamous incident involving head writer Michael O'Donoghue, who reportedly berated the cast and writers for ruining the show's legacy. For O'Hara, who had been raised in the collaborative, ultra-democratic environment of Second City Toronto, this hierarchical and adversarial structure was a fundamental mismatch. Consequently, O'Hara made a decision that shocked the industry. She quit SNL after only 1 week, without ever appearing in a single broadcast frame. She chose to return to Canada, rejoining SCTV just as it secured a deal for SCTV Network 90 on NBC. This move was a preservation of artistic integrity over fame. Had she stayed, she likely would have been subsumed into the celebrity factory model of 1980s New York. Instead, she returned to Edmonton, Alberta, where SCTV had moved production to CITV TV facilities, to refine a style of sophisticated sketch comedy that prioritized character depth over easy punchlines. The statistical reality of this move was significant. SCTV Network 90 offered a 90-minute format, giving O'Hara and her peers unprecedented room for thick description in their sketches. They weren't just doing 5-minute bits, they were producing entire broadcast days of fictional programming. This transition from Toronto to Edmonton represented a pivot toward total creative autonomy. While SNL was struggling with its identity, SCTV was winning Emmys for writing, cementing O'Hara's status as a structural architect of the show's reality. The move to Edmonton also reinforced the Canadianness of the production, protecting the troupe from the homogenizing pressures of the Hollywood machine. The credibility of O'Hara's work is anchored in the pedagogical lineage of Viola Spolin, the mother of theatrical improvisation. As explained by scholars in the Oxford Handbook of Critical Improvisation Studies, the Second City method is a direct application of Spolin's 1963 landmark text, Improvisation for the Theater. This phenomenon is known as the theater games theory, which posits that improvisation is a democratic act, a First Amendment in action that demands the player relinquish their ego to the present moment. Spolin's theory suggests that by focusing on a specific physical task or game, the actor bypasses the analytical mind and enters a state of flow. O'Hara's ability to imbue even the most absurd characters with a vulnerable heart is a mastery of this theory. She does not judge her characters, she inhabits their internal logic with total commitment. This is the difference between making a face and becoming a person. Her work is a systemic application of the yes-and mindset, accepting the reality of the scene partner without hesitation to allow for the emergence of a shared ephemeral truth. Furthermore, her work aligns with the sociological observations of Irving Goffman in the presentation of self in everyday life. Goffman's social interactive order suggests that human interaction is a series of access rituals and staged performances. O'Hara's comedy functions as a forensic autopsy of these rituals. When she portrays a character like Moira Rose, she is essentially playing a character who is constantly performing her own identity. This layer of performance within a performance creates a meta-commentary on how we utilize masks to navigate power structures and social hierarchies. This isn't just entertainment, it is an academic exploration of how identity is constructed and maintained within a competitive social landscape. The deepest layer of the O'Hara narrative is the paradox of her survival and eventual dominance in a male-dominated hegemony. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, the architecture of comedy was fundamentally patriarchal. The institutions, Second City, SNL, the burgeoning late-night circuit, were designed by and for men. O'Hara, alongside her contemporary Andrea Martin, navigated this systemic bias not by blending in, but by asserting a voice that was fearlessly singular. The irony, the paradox of the invisible protagonist, lies in the fact that O'Hara often played characters who were outrageously arrogant and hilariously proud, while she herself remained remarkably humble and self-deprecating. In the rehearsal room, she was known for making her partner look good, a core tenet of the yes-and philosophy. However, by elevating her male counterparts, such as Eugene Levy or John Candy, she actually seized control of the scene's emotional center. This was not a submission, but a strategic deployment of collaborative energy to subvert traditional gender dynamics. This dynamic is most evident in her partnership with Eugene Levy. In their collaborations, Levy often plays the straight man or the enabler, creating a safe space for O'Hara to explore the outer limits of eccentricity. However, the root cause of their success is a mutual trust that bypasses the ego-driven competition typical of Hollywood duos. This partnership allowed O'Hara to participate in the art form without compromise, creating a path for future generations of women to utilize the fullness of their voices. The tragedy is that this path was often paved through institutions that simultaneously struggled with their own systemic failures, including accusations of racism and a lack of diversity that only surfaced decades later. O'Hara's humility served as a protective shield. By remaining generous of spirit and focusing on the work rather than the mirage of celebrity, she avoided the burnout and bitterness that claimed so many of her contemporaries. She was the youngest of 7 children who simply loved making people laugh, yet she became the architect of a new comedic language. The systemic evolution of O'Hara's career reached a cinematic peak within the actor-forward philosophy of director Christopher Guest. Films like Waiting for Guffman, Best in Show, and A Mighty Wind functioned as the ultimate sandbox for her improvisational skills. These productions did not utilize traditional scripts. Instead, they operated off of a loose outline or story beats. This required the actors to draw from decades of training to make it up as they went along. In Best in Show, O'Hara portrayed Cookie Fleck, a woman with a past that kept surfacing at the dog show. The most iconic moment, the walk, was actually a piece of O'Hara family lore. Her father would walk ahead of the children and do a specific, silliest possible pratfall. O'Hara integrated this family bit into the movie, turning a personal anecdote into a legendary piece of physical comedy. This is the architecture of the pratfall, the ability to use the body as a narrative tool to express a character's internal instability. In A Mighty Wind, the paradox shifted toward the dramatic. O'Hara and Levy played Mitch and Mickey, folk singers who had once been in love. While the rest of the film was wickedly funny, O'Hara and Levy played their storyline completely straight. This authenticity created the emotional foundation for the entire movie. Their performance of A Kiss at the End of the Rainbow was so profound that it transcended the mockumentary format, resulting in an Oscar nomination and a live performance at the 2004 Academy Awards. This ability to oscillate between the zany and the heartbreaking is the fundamental catalyst of O'Hara's longevity. She doesn't just play for laughs, she plays for the shared humanity that laughter facilitates. If her early career was about transformation, her later career, specifically her role as Moira Rose in Schitt's Creek, was about the architecture of the mask. Moira Rose was a former soap opera star whose family lost everything, forcing them into a rundown motel. O'Hara's portrayal of Moira was defined by two distinct systemic choices: the unidentifiable accent and the lavish wig collection. Linguistic analysis of the Moira Rose accent reveals it to be a distorted version of the mid-Atlantic or transatlantic speech. This was historically a manicured speech used by the upper crust to signal status and intellectual distance. O'Hara Moiraized this further by pouring through old vocabulary books and inserting words like frippet, pettifogging, and ballatroon into the dialogue. This was a phonetic fortress, a way for Moira to remind everyone that she was special, even in a town named Schitt's Creek. The wigs, an idea O'Hara brought to the production herself, served as a symbolic representation of a woman who refused to be defined by her circumstances. Every wig was a different persona, a way to navigate a fresh and alien reality without losing her sense of self. This was drag therapy at its most sophisticated, using artifice to protect the vulnerable core of a displaced matriarch. The architecture of the wig allowed O'Hara to explore the tragedy of a woman whose perception of reality was constantly shifting, turning every scene into a theatrical event that reclaimed lost stage time. The systemic shift from traditional cable to the streaming hegemony of Netflix was the catalyst for the global explosion of Schitt's Creek. While the show was a joint venture between the CBC and the obscure Pop TV, it was its addition to Netflix in 2017 that allowed it to reach the critical mass necessary for its 2020 Emmy sweep. The data proves that U.S. audience attention skyrocketed after the historic wins. According to Nielsen streaming rankings from late 2020, Schitt's Creek climbed to the top of the charts for the week its final season hit Netflix. Users watched 968 million minutes of the show in a single week. In a year defined by countrywide lockdowns and anxiety-inducing news cycles, the series provided a much-needed escape. While original content like Ozark or The Mandalorian grabbed headlines, library content like Schitt's Creek offered comfort, the known quantity that viewers found refuge in during a period of global instability. The economic ripple effect of this success was measurable. The Schitt's Creek effect acted as a catalyst for the Ontario tourism industry. By 2023, tourism was generating $124.4 billion in revenue across Canada, with Ontario leading the recovery. Official reports from the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Gaming indicate that arts and culture tourism has tripled the economic impact of other tourism sectors. O'Hara's global visibility turned her into a brand ambassador for the Canadian creative economy, attracting international visitors to the locations that inspired the show. Every $100 million in direct tourism revenue generated $69 million in indirect output across other industries. On January 30, 2026, the world was met with the sobering news that Catherine O'Hara had passed away at her home in Los Angeles at the age of 71. Her death, following a brief illness, marked the end of a 50-year career that spanned from the subterranean clubs of Toronto to the pinnacle of Hollywood achievement. The timing was particularly poignant, as she had just completed work on Beetlejuice and was set to appear in HBO's The Last of Us, a testament to her inimitable ability to remain relevant across generations. Her legacy is not just a collection of awards, but an indelible footprint on the architecture of comedy. She was one of the first alumni to serve on the Second City's Artistic Advisory Board, providing mentorship to the next generation of performers. Her passing triggered a systemic wave of grief across the industry, with colleagues noting that the world was less funny without her. Yet her imprint remains architectural, found in the institution she built and the fearless path she cleared for others. The paradox of her final act lies in the realization that while she spent her life playing characters who were outrageously arrogant, she herself was a woman of strong faith and humility who never forgot her roots. She was the chameleon who refused to let the light change her,
choosing instead to change the world around her through the power of a heart of gold and a perfectly timed pratfall. As the world revisits her work on the streaming charts, we are reminded that Catherine O'Hara was never just an actress. She was a systemic catalyst for joy in an increasingly cynical world. Catherine O'Hara did not just inhabit characters, she engineered a new way of seeing the other through the lens of radical empathy and absurdist precision. This journey from the coat check of Toronto to the Emmy sweep of 2020 reveals a career that was both a mirage and a masterpiece, a systemic dismantling of the boundary between the performer and the persona. She navigated a male-dominated hegemony not with aggression, but with the collaborative abundance mindset of a true artist. Consequently, her legacy is not found in the awards on her shelf, but in the afterimage she left on the cultural landscape. She taught us that the masks we wear, the accents, the wigs, the theatrical flourishes, are not meant to hide us, but to provide the architecture necessary to reveal our most vulnerable truths. As her greatest performances continue to shoot up the streaming charts, one must wonder, in a world obsessed with authenticity, did it take a master of artifice to show us what it truly means to be human? Is the kiss at the end of the rainbow just a joke, or is it the only thing that's real?